Greeting friends, and welcome to another edition of History Notes with Professor Eagan. I hope that you are enjoying these so far. And today we're going to walk through the Chapter 2 notes on Egypt and figure out just how the Egyptians exhibit some of those major signs of and characteristics of civilization that we've been talking about thus far. Focus on the questions 9, 10, 13, and 16 from your textbook, and I'll share that page of the textbook here just to show you what I'm talking about, okay? Questions 9, 10, 13, and 16, okay? So 9 talks about the Nile River, certainly one of the bigger aspects of Egyptian civilization that you have to get under your belt there. How the climate, the geography, the environment absolutely influences the course, the conception of, and the development of Egyptian society and civilization. What are the characteristics of Egyptian civilization that we've been talking about throughout our course so far? How do the Egyptians exhibit those? What are some of those things? We'll look at some of those here in the next couple of minutes. When you're looking at some of the other things with Egypt, question 13 is a big one, the significance of pyramids, okay? I've also linked a video on our Canvas page for us to watch on the significance of the pyramids, why they're important, how they were built, and what they really meant to the Egyptians, as opposed to kind of what they mean to us. They certainly are one of the wonders of the world, but to the Egyptians, they held a specific and particular significance, and I hope that we can figure that out as we go through the material this week. And then finally, number 16, guaranteed question coming up on future quizzes and tests is you're going to compare and contrast the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. What are some things that they held in common? What are some things that differentiated the two cultures? Okay, make sure you're making a list of those and that you're getting those under your belt as we get through and start moving through some of the material. So let's go back to here and start looking at some of the major aspects of Egyptian civilization. Certainly the surrounding environment is going to be key, okay? Take a look here at the Fertile Crescent, showing you this kind of crescent moon shape where we just went over the Mesopotamians. Now we're moving southwest to northeastern Africa, okay? Egypt, still around today as a modern country, all right, as a modern civilization. So when you look at the swath of Egyptian history, it's amazing to think about. You know, there really is not too many ancient cultures left in the modern world. All right, you got the Greeks, you have aspects of Roman culture, you have certainly the ancient Hebrews, who are around in the modern practice of Judaism. Then you have the Egyptians. All right, the Egyptians are certainly a fantastically interesting culture to look at, and you can see from this map that they are formed by that Nile River. Okay, the Nile River certainly is the most formative aspect of Egyptian civilization. If we look at this aerial view from the satellite, all right, you can really start to see how much Egypt is dependent on the Nile. Take a look at how much Egypt, and kind of, try to, and it's hard to, this area right here, known as the Nile Delta, this was not going to be a major part of Egyptian civilization. This is mainly going to be kind of swampish, jungly type area. The broad swath of Egyptian civilization is going to take place right here, okay, sort of at the bottom of the Nile Delta and then down to here, this aspect of the Nile River. And so what I want you to see is that you get outside of that Nile river, you're encountered with the Sahara Desert, essentially. So what this means for Egyptian culture is that it's going to be very compacted. It's going to be very isolated within its own region. And because of this compact nature, which almost by default is going to produce large pockets of populations centered around a certain area, which we've talked about, that produces urban areas, that produces urbanization, it produces cities. And when you get massive amounts of people in closed areas, you will always get the creative nature of human beings coming about to figure out new ways to live, new ideas. That always happens when you get more people in an area. Okay, less people in an area. We talked about this in our classes so far. Less people, then it tends to move into group think, herd mentality, where nobody wants to think outside the group for fear of being castigated and chastised and thinking outside of the group. But if you get enough people together, you start getting some really cool ideas, and the Egyptians start developing those characteristics of civilization around 3000 to 2500 BC. Herodotus, the great Greek historian, one of the first historians, sometimes referred to as the father of history, referred to as Egypt as the gift of the Nile. And right, he was. Egypt certainly was, in the ancient world, the most economically productive civilization that we are going to encounter. The Egyptians are going to be the breadbasket of the Mediterranean for the entirety of ancient and classical cultures. As the Greeks will expand and turn into empires, certainly as the Romans will expand and turn into empire, all right, and even to the east of Egypt, the Persians, when they expand and turn into empire, everyone will always look to Egypt, look to control Egypt because of its vast economic power, all right, its ability to export any good you could possibly want of the ancient world. All right, the Nile River functioned as a highway. It functioned as an economic driver. All right, it functioned as the giver of life within the Egyptian region, and certainly their culture began to show those characteristics of civilization very early on. I love this modern image versus an ancient classical image in the bottom. What you see here is that the Nile River still is an extremely productive economic area for rice, for barley, for wheat, for all of those different types of things, all right, that you could possibly want. And you can even see in this image at the bottom, all right, here, you see domestication of animals. You see agriculture being produced. Look at all the different types of plants. You can see pineapples there. You see palm trees. You can see coconuts. You can see all of the different things in the Egyptian environment being extremely productive. But then what you can also see is a man and a woman. You can see the man moving the beast forward, okay, moving the plow. But you can also see the woman behind the man, sowing the field, dropping the seeds in the newly plowed turf. And what this tells historians, and what this hieroglyphic, even if you didn't know how to decipher the hieroglyphic, which we'll get to and talk about how we are able to decipher them in a little bit, you would know that there was a division of labor. There was jobs that men did and jobs that women did. You would also get a look at Egyptian hairstyles. Men with the cropped, sort of short, I don't want to say short, but shoulder length hair no longer. Facial features, including goatees, very popular amongst Egyptian men in the ancient and classical world. Women, long dress, okay, you can see there, ankle length, hair past the shoulders. We'll talk about Egyptian hair styles and that type of thing in a minute. But again, you can learn a lot just from one image. And hopefully what you guys are learning to do is look at the images and start making the connections from the things that we've gone over in class thus far. These images show you and exhibit all the characteristics of a successful civilization. Take a look at some of these images and see if you can't yourself start to pinpoint and pick out aspects of those civilizations. Again, in all these images, we see economic production. We see domestication of animals. We see division of labor. We see different types of crops being produced. We see different types of goods being produced. All right, in the bottom right, you see pottery being fired in a kiln. Okay, Egyptian pottery was the best of the Mediterranean region. Egypt also had a huge fishing industry. Bottom left picture, you can see men fishing, harpooning, all the different types of fish that could come out of the Nile. Economic production all over the place. A hallmark of Egyptian civilization. But also, Egyptian civilization was able to produce leisure time. Egyptian civilization was so productive, they were able to produce, by and large, not for everybody, but by and large, Egyptian civilization was able to produce such a surplus of goods that the Egyptians had time for leisure. They had time for what we today would consider luxury goods, okay? Some of these included the picture on the left, all right? Egypt, as well as many places in the ancient world, we'll talk about this a couple times in our class throughout this semester, but smells and perfumes were a major aspect of the ancient and classical world, okay? If you think about it, human beings were obsessed with smells, all right? We still are kind of obsessed with smells, but our world today is very neutral smelling, okay? We walk into a room and we notice if there's a smell in the room, either a perfume or a cologne or something like that. In the ancient world and in the classical world, and for Egyptians, they were looking to cover up a lot of things with smells, okay? You would try, of course, yes, to cover up, you know, the smell of domesticated animals, the barnyard smell, the smell of death, okay? You were constantly encountered with death in the ancient world, okay? But human beings wanted nice smelling things, perfumey smelling things. And so what happens is women, when they would go out in polite company, all right, out to parties, all right, that they would have in ancient Egypt, what you would put on top of your head was a kind of a wax melting cone that would be kept in cool underground temperatures so that when it did reach air temperature, it melted into your wig, middle picture, okay? Egyptian women loved to wear wigs. It was a staple of Egyptian style. These wigs could be made of human hair, horse hair, all types of fabrics, okay? And they were the must-have of Egyptian culture, okay? When you went outdoors, all right, as an Egyptian woman, you put on a certain style of wig, okay? Most of them, again, were kind of, you know, cropped here. Most pictures you'll see the Egyptian women hair being kind of cropped here with bangs and then long hair past the shoulder length. These images talk about that. And that was even true for servants. As you can see, the woman on the right is clearly a servant of the people sitting down. And even her hairstyle, though, was of the same type. All right, it would have been a wig of shoulder or a little bit longer than shoulder length. Another interesting thing you see in that picture is a domesticated pet, a house cat. Egyptians loved to keep pets. It was one of the hallmarks of Egyptian upper class civilization. pets, all right? And cats, not dogs, rather cats, were the preferred Egyptian pet. Finally, on the right, historians and archaeologists have uncovered numerous polished obsidian mirrors. Obsidian is a very dark black volcanic type rock, all right, native to the Egyptian and the Middle Eastern and Mediterranean regions. And this type of rock, now, the Egyptians didn't have, glass or mirrors or anything that we understand like that, but they had this ability to polish obsidian to such a high sheen and reflective property that you could see yourself in it, right? Much like you can, see your faint reflection in all kinds of different things that aren't mirrors. The Egyptians were able to view themselves and see what they looked like. So what you can see from these pictures is the Egyptians were very concerned in their society, in their social makeup, with how they looked, all right? Much like we are today, right? We're not that different, all right? That's the big thing I want you to get when we look at these classical civilizations is some things that we're very concerned about, our outward appearance, what our hair looks like, not me, for instance, but rather, what my mustache looks like, those types of things, all right? Very concerned with how you appeared in public. The Egyptians give us that aspect of their civilization right here. Let's take a look at some other parts of Egyptian leisure culture. We can thank the Egyptians for inventing beer, essentially, all right? Historians and archaeologists have discovered the earliest fermented beverages, what we today call those delicious fermented beverages, beer, all right? Where you take yeast and barley and other types of things, you combine them with water, you leave them to ferment and create alcohol, and then you drink and pour that alcoholic beverage for all types of reasons, right? You can take them for medical reasons. You can enjoy a nice alcoholic beverage for frivolity and enjoying and having a good time with your pals. But also, guys, remember this: alcoholic drinks are, in this era and in the ancient and classical world, safer to drink than water. Right? Alcoholic drinks have been essentially purified. Right? They have been distilled out. A lot of them have been distilled out. And that, when you do that with water, when you create that fermentation with water, it takes out all of the bad bacteria and stuff that tends to make you sick when you just drink well water, when you drink water out of the river, or when you drink water out of a stream. All right. So again, these aspects of Egyptian beer making, and also the Egyptians were very, very good wine makers, as you can see from this instance. All right. The picking of the grapes on the left, the stomping of the grapes, and the filling of the wine jugs. And then again, on the right, a very famous image of a servant pouring a nice bowl of wine for her Egyptian I guess, I don't want to call them, her Egyptian betters. All right. So I guess that's the best way to describe them, her social betters. But that is a very interesting thing, guys. You can look from all these images, and you can see the hieroglyphics up top describing them. But again, Egyptian culture was able to form and create, because of their vast economic productivity, an element of leisure culture that we still should, in this modern world, find very interesting, to be sure. If you're looking at your book, make sure you focus on pages 44 and 45, because they talk about another hallmark of Egyptian civilization, and we've talked about this in our course so far. A civilization that can produce written language is one that is generally deemed by historians and archaeologists alike as being a next level up civilization, okay? And the Egyptian writing was known as hieroglyphics. Egyptian written language was known as hieroglyphics. And it was completely and utterly impossible to decipher for the majority of post-Egyptian history. Now, why is that? One, guys, because this type of writing was extremely difficult to learn, extremely difficult to practice, extremely difficult to draw. I mean, imagine that picture on the left there, chiseling those images. How good of an artist and how good of a craftsman you have to be able to chisel images in perfect form like that, okay? So the point is that it took a long time to teach hieroglyphics, and it took a long time to learn to make hieroglyphics. And that type of time commitment, all right, when the Egyptian civilization does fall apart, and we'll talk about that next week, all right, when the Egyptian civilization does fall apart, one of the things that falls apart with it is the ability to pass on the knowledge of this written language. Okay, so this was virtually indecipherable. I mean, you see the image on the right, you see, you know, kind of a beetle or a bug. You see the sun, there's an arm holding a feather, what looks like some sort of plow instrument, and a row of teeth. I don't know what the heck that is at the bottom. You know, on the other side, you hit, you know, on the right side, you got a feather, a falcon, some other sort of farming implements. What the heck does that mean? Nobody knew what that meant until we were able to get essentially a code break. All right, we needed some sort of language that this was translated into. That happened in the late 1700s, 1799 to be exact, when the French Empire, all right, and I know this is outside of our course bounds, but if you stick with me on the next part of our class, 102, we talk about the French Revolution. And the French Revolution produced a military leader known as Napoleon. And Napoleon and the French Revolution sought to take over what were seen as important aspects of the Mediterranean world. One place where they really wanted to take over was Egypt. Why? Because Egypt's important, right? He who could control Egypt was seen as very powerful. So not only did Napoleon and the French send down an army to try and subdue and take Egypt essentially away from the British, they also sent down French historians, French archaeologists, the earliest French scientists of the Enlightenment era. One of these guys, you can see him there on the left. His name is Jean-Francois Champollion. It's a fantastic name, all right? Let's not call him Jean-Francois Champollion, all right? Let us say it in proper French, Jean-Francois Champollion, all right? It makes you sound smarter when you can speak conversational French. All right? Try it out at the dinner table and become a guest that everybody wants around. He discovered this thing known as the Rosetta Stone. We today know the Rosetta Stone as a form of language tutorial, all right? A software that helps us speak different languages, all right? And why they took that name Rosetta Stone is because this key, this code break, unlocked what hieroglyphics meant. And the key was, guys, this language at the bottom. Right? The language at the bottom of this tablet is Greek. And the language at the top is hieroglyphics, and you can see, okay? But the language at the bottom is Greek. And so what was happening down here is we had a Greek translation of what was meant up at the top by the hieroglyphics. And voila, okay? When we can understand what it means in Greek, then you can translate it out, because everybody, all right, in the 1700s, if you were an educated person, you certainly could read and write Greek, all right? And so we were able to figure out what these images meant. And the most interesting thing occurred. These images didn't describe images at all. They were actually kind of a proto-early alphabet. The images were sounds. What the Egyptians were doing when they drew these images is they were making sounds to sound out words. All right? So this is like the next step in the evolution of the alphabet. You had cuneiform with the Mesopotamians, wedge-shaped writing. You had to understand what the wedges meant, and then you could form the picture in your head. Then you have hieroglyphics, where you have a picture and you're sounding out letters. So for instance, when you drew a forearm, all right, you had the sound ah, all right? When you drew a foot, the sound of b or b came out, all right? All over the place, all right? You can see if you drew a loaf of bread on the right there, you had the t sound came out. So what you did is you could rearrange. Let's just do it here. Let's spell cat, all right? So what we need to do is we need to find the k sound. Well, you can see it right there. Top, basket, all right? So in order to spell cat, you would draw a basket, a forearm, and where's the T? Anybody know? The loaf of bread. So you would draw a basket, forearm, loaf of bread if you wanted to say cat. That seems terribly complicated, does it not? All right, because one, you got to be really good at art to draw a basket, a forearm, and a loaf of bread and have people understand that your basket is a basket and not actually a forearm. Me, when I try to do hieroglyphics, because I'm a terrible artist, my forearm ends up looking like a foot, my basket ends up looking like some sort of bowl, and my loaf of bread, I don't even know what the heck my loaf of bread looks like. So nobody would get what I'm trying to say or write. We understand now the reason why our alphabet is easy for us is because our little squiggles, our little signs, C-A-T, that's pretty easy to draw, right? Even if you're a terrible artist, okay? Even if you're a little kid, which is when we teach our children the language, any little kid by the age of 4 or 5 can start to squiggle out C-A-T, all right? That's why this language was, again, one of those languages that was held in the elites. It was held in the upper crust of society. It was not for everyone, right? Very few Egyptians knew how to read hieroglyphics. They could certainly, yes, speak orally. You could speak Egyptian, right? There was an oral language of Egyptian, okay? But not everybody knew how to read and write, okay? Because that was the property, the sole property of the elites. But again, it's a written language. You could write down laws. You were able to communicate, right? And make sure you pick up on that from the chapter notes. Another hallmark of Egyptian civilization is Egyptian religious expression. The Egyptians were, quite frankly, I think, one of the most interesting civilizations to talk about in terms of their religious expression. This is a testament to how successful Egyptian civilization was economically, productively, that they were able to create such a pantheon, such an interesting mythological experience, okay? The Egyptian gods were the same as, I don't want to say the same, but they exhibited the same characteristics as all the gods that we will look at in this course of ancient and classical world. Polytheistic, many gods. There's lots of Egyptian gods. You can start to see them right here in the picture on the bottom right. They're anthropomorphic and they're zoomorphic. You should have a good idea of what that means by now, guys. Okay, remember, anthropomorphic in human form, zoomorphic, you see that word zoo again, in animal form. And a lot of the Egyptian gods were blends, kind of half animal, half human. And you can see that with the god on the right, okay? This god appears many times. That is known as the god Horus, okay? Horus, you can now start to understand some of Egyptian culture. You can look at Egyptian pictures, and when you see a falcon-headed god, you'll know that you're looking at Horus. We'll talk about who Horus is here in a minute. But the Egyptian religious structure, their mythological experience was really interesting. All right, I find it endlessly fascinating to talk about. Pages 50 and 51 discuss some of the aspects of Egyptian mythology. So please, if you need to pause this and read up on it, please do now, or read it after watching this, all right, whatever you need to do. The main central god in the Egyptian mythological experience was the sun god, okay? The sun god, and over time, the god of the universe, kind of blend into one god, okay? So the Egyptians had the sun god Ra, they had the god of the universe who they called Amun, and then over time, the Egyptians would simply just pray to the god of the sun and the universe, Amun Ra, okay? You can see it at the top of the page there, okay? But the sun god Ra, sometimes spelled R-E, sometimes spelled R-A, okay? Don't need to worry about that and how it's, spelled. Either one is fine. But to the Egyptians, the sun was everything. Okay? The sun made all life possible, right? The sun and its cycles of rebirth and regeneration, of coming up in the morning and dying into the earth at night, those were central features of Egyptian religious expression. Some other interesting gods found in Egyptian mythology, you can see on the right there at the bottom, a green-looking god. Why is it green? And I asked the question. This is the god Osiris. Why is Osiris green? Is he sick? Is he car sick? Did he eat some bad Egyptian fish? No, he's not ill. All right. Osiris is green for another reason. We'll talk about it here when I tell this story. This is one of the great mythological stories, in my opinion, of all time. The Egyptians have creation myths, just like all cultures. All right, and this creation myth is one of the more interesting ones, I think, in all of human history. Way back when, guys, and I'm talking way back at the start of everything, all right? And all cultures have these creation myths. The Egyptians believed that their creator god, Ra, Amun-Ra, created on earth this experience, the heavens, the earth, the Nile River, all of it. And then he placed some children that he created on earth. Sound familiar? I think it does. Osiris was one of his children. Okay, as well as there was another child, Osiris's brother. His name was Set. All right, sometimes it's spelled S-E-T-H, sometimes S-E-T. Don't need to worry about it. Osiris and Set were brothers. They had a sister named Isis. Now it looks, as you can see there, Osiris and his wife Isis. Now, yeah, you're like, wait a minute, it's his sister, it's also his wife. Well, guys, the pickings were slim in the creation story, okay? There weren't a lot of women. In fact, there were no other women on earth besides Osiris, Set, besides Isis, okay? So just kind of bear with me on that. It's not, I don't want to create like awkwardness from telling the story, but there's a lot of these things in ancient mythological expression. The long and the short of the story is that Osiris and Isis fall in love with each other and become man and wife. And Set, his brother, is jealous. Brothers fighting. Sound familiar? I think it does. All right. I think within the Hebrew and Christian tradition, you have the Cain and Abel story, okay, of brothers fighting against one another. Set is very upset, pardon the pun, that Osiris and Isis are together, and so he kills Osiris in a fight. And Isis is brokenhearted. What she does is, the thing is that Set, not only does he kill his brother, but he chops him up, he dismembers him, and he sends Osiris's body to the four corners of Egypt. All right. It's kind of an ugly little story, too. And then Isis, what she does is she goes on a journey to put Osiris back together, kind of like Humpty Dumpty. All right. And she puts Osiris back together. And she's able to, and this is where the beauty of this story comes in. This is kind of a tearjerker type story. She's able to breathe life into Osiris for one day. All right. She breathes life into him, of course, with a kiss. Now, what has happened to Set? Set by this time has been, sort of cast off, okay, because Set is this bad, terrible god who killed his brother, and Set just kind of appears, throughout various intervals of Egyptian history as kind of like a devil figure, but the Egyptians didn't really have a heaven and a hell like we like we have kind of in modern conception. But Set, he goes off. He is sent away. And Isis is able to breathe life into Osiris for one day, right? And during that one day, they are able to create a child, Horus, okay? And this regeneration, this rebirth, which then after that one day, Osiris dies into the underworld. So to the Egyptians, guys, there was very much a line that delineated the world of the living up here and the world of the dead down here. And Osiris becomes the god of the underworld, the god of the afterlife. It's why he's green, guys, because green is the color of rejuvenation. Green is the color of new life. Think about it in the spring. Everything turns green. Right? From the death of the winter and the fall, the brown, drab winter and fall. In the springtime, the rejuvenation, the green. All right. And Osiris, it is believed by the Egyptians, we'll talk about this on an upcoming slide. Osiris lives in the underworld, and he's the god of the underworld. And he will breathe life into you if you live a good life. And we'll talk about that. On earth up here, the god of the living is Horus. All right. Horus is the god of the living. Okay. So the Egyptians have all types of gods. All right. But Osiris and Isis, they rule the afterlife. Horus rules this life, the god of the living. Okay. And that's why I find this next slide really interesting. And I have question marks up here. Because many Egyptian households, these have been uncovered in many Egyptian households. These two figurines here of Osiris on the left, Isis on the right, holding little baby, tiny 6-pound, 8-ounce Horus. All right. And this is kind of a holy family situation that the Egyptians would pray to. All right. Much like Christians, if you are Christians, Catholic Christians, etc., we have a holy family. All right, you have a Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. That type of holy family. Now, I'm not comparing. Okay, don't go running out of here and being like, Professor Eagan compared Jesus to Osiris. I'm upset. Don't do that. I'm just saying that there's similarities. There's three people. There's the Trinity. There's the Holy Family. There's the Father, the Son, the Mother. Okay? You get these types of things in a lot of ancient cultures. The Egyptians were no different. And these were figurines that the Egyptians would pray to. These were uncovered in many Egyptian households. In your textbook, the Book of the Dead is referenced a few times. The Book of the Dead was a hieroglyphic text that described many aspects of what was going on and what was going to happen to you when you died. Okay? It was kind of like a handbook for the dead. All right? Essentially, but it was also a handbook for the living. How to prepare your soul, how to prep yourself for your afterlife. What do you need to do in this life? What do you need to do when you die? Okay? There were prayers that you needed to recite when you died. There were prayers and things that you needed to do while you were alive. In the Book of the Dead, the appearance of this god is prominent, and I'm sort of circling him right here with the cursor, okay? But it is a jackal, a dog, okay, a canine-headed god called Anubis. And Anubis was very prominent in this Book of the Dead, this afterlife handbook, because Anubis was the god that you saw when you died. Anubis was kind of like the Grim Reaper, okay? So in Egyptian tradition, when you saw Anubis, you were like, ah, crap, I'm dead, all right? Because Anubis is here to take me to the afterlife, all right? And hopefully you were ready, all right? As you can see here from this image, Anubis is holding on to the sarcophagus. He's holding on to this dead person. The people are performing prayers and burning incense and having a meal of food at his funeral, right? The women, as you can see, are dressing the body, getting it ready for its journey into the afterlife. The men, the priests, are performing rituals and decked out in their finest clothes. And Anubis you can see Anubis is kind of grabbing the guy saying, all right, you guys ready? Are you done with the funeral yet? Because I got to take him to the afterlife and see if he's worthy of what comes next. And what comes next, guys, is the judgment. Modern connections here all over the place. Many of us today in the modern world believe that when we die, we will be judged. There will be some sort of judgment that comes of our soul, of our experience of life on this earth. Did you live a good life? Did you live a bad life? Do you gain access to the afterlife? Many of us call that heaven in the modern world. Do you gain access to heaven? The Egyptians didn't have a heaven or a hell. They just had an afterlife. And to the Egyptians, this afterlife was a pleasant place. Your book talks about it. Hopefully you read up on it and take some notes on it. It was a pleasant place. The Egyptian afterlife was not a dark and dank place like the Mesopotamians believed. The Mesopotamian afterlife was not a pleasant place. To the Egyptian, afterlife was a kind of a continuation of life. It was a pleasant place. There were blue skies. It was a place where you just kind of continued on with your tasks. If you were a farmer in this world, you were going to be a farmer in the afterlife. But you had to get there. What happened? How did you do it? Well, some of the things that you needed to do, guys, was you had to have your heart weighed. And that's where we come in with this image here. Here's Anubis. He's got this poor guy by the hand, and he's leading him to judgment. You can read this hieroglyph as kind of moving left to right across your computer screen. Okay. Again, we still read, the majority of us in the modern world still read left to right, okay, as the hieroglyphics move in the story pattern. You can see Anubis holding his hand. Then Anubis is kneeling down at the scale, the judgment scale. And on the left is the person's heart, their soul, their sum of all the deeds and all the stuff that you did in this life. Did you live a good life? Did you live a light-hearted life? Modern connection. Is your soul heavy? Did you treat people like dirt? Were you mean to people? Were you living a life that weighed your heart down? And so when the Egyptians got to the afterlife, on one side of the scale was your heart, which had all of your human deeds in it. On the other side of the scale was a feather. We all know feathers are really light. So as Anubis moves that scale of judgment outward to try and counteract how heavy your heart is against the feather, you would want to live, and the Egyptians talked about this, you'd want to live a light-hearted life, a life that didn't that was full of goodness and virtue, that didn't weigh you down, because you didn't want your heart to be too heavy when you died. The further that weight is moved out to the right, and you can see it's all being recorded by this god known as Tot. It's kind of a, again, one of the other cool things that you can see in Egyptian culture is you can see all the different types of animals, right, are displayed in their gods and their religious expression. This is an ibis, or a kind of water bird type god. Right? We've all seen these types of water birds in more southerly, warm climates. Okay, sometimes they're called herons, sometimes they're called ibises. We've all hopefully seen those in marshes and other types of areas. That god he's writing down, he's making sure he's recording whether your heart is too heavy or not. And probably one of my all-time favorite gods in all of ancient mythology is this god right in the middle here, his little guy named Amit, who was wrapped up the three most deadly animals in the Egyptian environment: the crocodile, the lion, and the hippopotamus. And so you can see he has the head of the crocodile, the front torso of a lion, and the back half of a hippopotamus. Those are the three deadliest animals in the Egyptian environment. All right. And Amit is ready to devour your heart. He's ready to eat your heart. He's ready to devour your soul if it's too heavy. And that, guys, was the worst for an Egyptian. If your heart was too heavy and you were consumed by Amit, if you were eaten by Amit in the afterlife, that was it for you. You were done. You didn't get to go to the afterlife. You didn't get to see your ancestors who had moved on to the afterlife. You were done. Gone. Eaten. Oblivion forever. So when, and you can see from this image, this guy does make it. He makes it to the final judgment, and you can see then Horus greeting this man, all right, showing him to Osiris, saying, here you are, gain entrance to the afterlife. And you can see Osiris there on the right, green, ready to rejuvenate this person and breathe life into him into the afterlife. What a cool story, all described by this awesome book known as the Book of the Dead. Finally, friends, make sure you're reading up on pages 44 and 45, where it talks about this group of unifiers, this group of individuals that essentially start the royal ruling family of Egypt. They are known as the Pharaohs. We're not going to go through all of them, okay? One of the cool things about the video that I want you to watch is they talk about a few of the pharaohs, including this individual right here, who sometimes is called Menes, sometimes he is called Narmer, okay? Either one, doesn't matter, all right? You can call him Narmer, you can call him Menes. That's, one of the images of this individual was seen as the first of the pharaohs. The city where Narmer/Menes lived was Memphis, okay, located a very important part of the Nile River, okay. Modern connection, we have a very important city on a very important river in modern America, known as Memphis, Tennessee, on the Mississippi River, okay, a very important part of the Mississippi River. So again, modern connections to Egypt all over the place. The Pharaoh Narmer was a military unifier. He was very much like Hammurabi to the Mesopotamians. He was able to establish military dominance over Egypt and then create within his family essentially a royal family where power would then be passed father to son throughout the generations. What Pharaoh was also able to do, because they were the tippy top crust of society, is then Pharaoh was able to use all of his power, all of his, elite control to slip himself and his family into the Egyptian myth, into their mythological aspects, okay? And what that means is that Pharaoh is able to make himself, he's able to slip himself into the myth as a god, right? As a descendant of Horus, okay? As someone who is a living god on earth. And once this catches on and is implemented in Egyptian society, the pharaohs, translated out, simply means, pharaoh means great house. It means royal family in Egyptian. And the Egyptian society was ruled very much like a, English society. British society was ruled by kings, and French society was ruled by kings. And, we have kings and queens all over the place in, classical, and then, the Romans will do this with emperors. The Persians will do it with kings, those types of things, all right? You'll see this in a lot of human history, where you will then have a hierarchical family tradition, okay? All right, what we know today as passing it from father to son down throughout the generations, okay? A linear passage of power, okay? And the pharaohs were able to do that and control Egypt for hundreds and thousands of years, okay? As you can see, Narmer/Menes was around 3100 BCE, and power will remain in a very few upper elite Egyptian families for the next 2,000 years. Egypt will be, and this is where we're going to leave off here, guys, because I want you just to kind of try and wrap your minds around this. Egypt will be the power of the Mediterranean, the economic power, the military power, the cultural power of the Mediterranean region for 2,000 years. From around 3100 to around 1200 BCE. That is mind-freaking boggling to think about. That a culture could run the show in a region for 2,000 years. I mean, let's look at, modern superpowers like the United States, for instance. We're coming up on our 250th birthday of the United States. But we haven't been a superpower for all those 250 years. We've only been a superpower basically for probably a little under 100 years. All right? Mainly, just kind of World War II, post-World War II, up to now, we've been a superpower. So 75, 80 years. We got a long way to go to match the superpower status that the Egyptians were rocking in the Mediterranean for 2,000 years. Okay? That's why Egypt is important. That's why they're meaningful. And that's why they're a culture that we study in this course. Hope you guys have enjoyed our look at classical, ancient Egyptian culture. Until next time, my friends, take care.